All right. Hope you all are doing well today. A couple weeks ago, we were talking about what we mean by faith, and I thought we'd talk a little bit more about that, mainly because after we have a conversation, I think of better ways to try and explain things I'm trying to say. So it really is a dialogue. To me, it is a back and forth sort of thing. I'll say things, y'all will say things, and then I'll reflect on what you guys have said. So I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of faith. And it's a little bit of an artificial distinction. So I'm just noting that. But for the purposes of discussion, we're differentiating and we're using these terms, belief as a little bit different from faith. Now, in Scripture, they're synonymous so much, right? And as I mentioned, faith or belief has to do with trust. It doesn't have to do with you cognitively agree with something as a proposition. Like, do you think that, do you believe that George Washington was the first president of the United States? Yes, I do. That's belief of something as a proposition, as a statement, as a truth statement. But when we're reading in Scripture about faith and belief, we're not talking about that. We're talking about leaning into something, relying on something, trusting in something, and the something being the story of God as revealed historically, but ultimately through Jesus, right? So I want to put it this way in a phrase, and maybe this will help us think about it. And I didn't come up with this phrase. Maybe someone else, I don't know where I've heard it, but I like the statement that says, we only believe as much as we do. We only believe as much as we do. Or we could say we only have faith, but usually we trip up more with the idea of belief, right? Because we think, oh, do you believe that? We only believe as much as we do. Now, what's that statement implying? What's it getting us to do when we make that statement? We only believe as much as we do. Okay, some sort of commitment, right? What else? Or expanding upon that. We only believe as much as we do.
I think participating in it, when I think of do, I think of participating in believing.
Yeah, it somehow has to have a component that calls me to a different way of being, of becoming, of living. Otherwise, we're really not talking about Christian faith. And see, this might help us realize when someone's discussing, do you believe that? Do you believe in this? And the question is there any lived out difference if I do or if I don't? If there's not, you're asking me about a cognitive thing just in my head. Do I agree with a proposition? You're not asking me something that has legs, that has implications, that draws me into a whole life. Right?
Maybe another way is thinking about things in 2D versus 3D. In 2D, I could accept it cognitively, but if I trust in it, there's a subjective depth dimension to that thing.
I don't think you know what you believe in until you have something where you have to lean against it.
Yeah, exactly. Talk is cheap until you actually have to live it out. Like, what do I believe in? Now I'm faced with something.
Right. And that requires a degree of vulnerability.
Yes. Yeah. Vulnerability, risk.
Yes.
Risk with intention is one way of defining it.
From a much different perspective, there's a truism that says you can tell what a company believes in by what they pay attention to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In a business sense, yeah, because there can be a lot of talk about we have a mission statement. Yeah, but let's look at what the company's doing, because every company has these lofty mission statements, but what are they actually focusing on? What are they actually doing? You know, everyone wants to bring world peace until you look at, well, what are they doing, right? So we were talking as an illustration last time, and maybe some of you weren't here, or you're not even recalling the conversation, but we were talking about, what do you do with a story like Jonah? And people want to, well, do you believe in the story of Jonah? And often they're focusing on, do you believe factually, literally, that a whale swallowed a man? And for 3 days he was in his belly and then got vomited up on the shorelines of, the upper Near East, up there kind of near Nineveh, which I guess would put him up there, a little past Cyprus somewhere on the coast northeast of Cyprus, right? But my question would be, if you're asking me whether I believe that, what lived difference does it make whether I think that literally happened or I think that's a parable, a story with meaning and import? But is there really any lived difference if I believe it factually versus believe it as a parable? For the life of me, I can't see that it makes any difference. Because if it actually happened, it's still telling me God loves all people, you ought not to be judgmental. It's telling me those things. And if it's a parable, guess what? It's still telling me those things. God loves all people. You don't need to be judgmental. You don't need to be like Jonah, and wish ill upon your enemies. In other words, the part about the great monster swallowing Jonah isn't germane to any faith about the story. Does that make sense? Because if you're saying, well, we only believe as much as we do. So someone says, well, I believe that. My question is, well, what are you doing out of that belief? And if there's no real deep connection between believing that fact and something they do as a result of it, then I'm kind of like, well, then we're talking about just cognitive agreement with propositional statements. We're not talking about biblical faith, right?
Greg, one of the things that I've been trying to put into words, I'm just going to stumble around until I hopefully get there, is that many times we think about belief as, I believe in my understanding of this thing.
Sure.
And of course, all of our understandings are wrong to some extent. And so, like you plant your flag on my understanding. Do I plant my flag on my understanding, or am I okay that I don't fully understand?
Yeah. So very much so. I would talk about like what I would call epistemological humility. Epistemology is the study of how we know. That's just what that is in philosophy or something. Epistemology is, well, how do you know something? And we ought to have humility about our knowledge, right? So how we know something is always imperfect. Yeah, so I need to say, it's not really my understanding I'm committed to. I'm committed to something bigger than my understanding. While I might be working with my understanding in the moment, if my understanding gets challenged, I need to shift. What were you going to say?
I've been wrong a lot.
Yeah, I've been wrong a lot, right? Yeah, exactly. I've been wrong a lot. And recognizing that has actually been part of my journey. I now think of things differently than I used to. Well, how'd I get there? I figured out I was wrong about something, right? So if I come with that assumption of saying, yeah, it's not that I hold so tightly to my understanding. It's the working one I have at the moment. And I'm looking forward to God revealing more. Okay, so I'm going to use as an example the story of the prodigal son. And I call it a story because I would call it a parable, but you know what? In the text, it doesn't say it's a parable, which would be the whole point. Does it really matter whether it's a parable or not, right? So we're in Luke 15, beginning in verse 11. So about the chapter begins with the story of the lost sheep, which it says he told them a parable. But then after that, it doesn't specifically say. It doesn't say this is a parable. But there's where I'm going to suggest it doesn't matter. If it's a parable, then it's a story Jesus made up to make a point. Or maybe he knows a guy who had 2 sons and it worked out this way. And he's just recounting, without names to, protect the guilty, right? But maybe this really happened. I don't know. But either way, the question is, do I believe the story? In other words, have faith that this is telling me something. So let me read it real quickly, and starting in verse 11, and then let's talk about what it means to believe this, right? Verse 11, and he said, a man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. But when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So he got up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let's eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing, and he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. But he became angry and was not willing to go in. And his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours. And yet you have never given me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live, and was lost and has been found. Okay, do we believe the parable or the story? Doesn't matter. Maybe it really happened. Maybe it's just a story Jesus made up. But what does it mean actually to believe this?
First of all, it's a real story because it's been acted millions of times in this country.
It's a real story because it's true to life.
People are bad kids are always leaving home and they come crawling back. But
Yeah.
I love this story because there's so many applications of it, and so many parents have to be that dad. And we studied it for a whole quarter at Cabo Valley Church on the basis of Rembrandt's picture of the prodigal son's father. And that's an amazing, I think Henry Nouwen wrote the book about it, I believe. But one hand is a masculine hand and the other hand is a feminine hand. So it's a really rich story for so many reasons.
Okay.
Well, backing up to Jonah, because I studied that a lot when I was confronted with those things and trying in my walk and whatever, and I went to just Google this now and everything, but Jesus referred to it as if it was a real incident. And the Nineveh turned and repented, the entire city, on on a parable, on a fable, or whatever. They were saying, there were witnesses on the boat that came back and did. And, I mean, I get the point, it doesn't really matter whether it's fact or fiction, but
It's true.
it's treated as if it's true by Jesus, and then it's also treated as if it's true from, scientifically now, and that was one of the things that I said, that there is some possibility of that being, of it occurring, that there have been people swallowed and
Right.
Spit up and everything. So I think what's amazing now, to your point, is more and more of the Bible now is getting shown to be factual and timelines and unearthing things in Jerusalem, and it's amazing how all of a sudden, oh well, this is true. Oh yes, Jesus really was a person because it's mentioned here, and oh yeah, this was truly the folks. So I tend to, I don't really, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I think it's the point.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I want us to think in terms of what does it mean to believe any of these stories. And the thing is, you only believe it in as much as you do something. Because I can believe all of it is factual, or I might believe none of it's factual, but I can have either of those positions and still do nothing, which means I believe nothing, right? I'm getting it. How do we believe? So in this story, how do we believe this parable / story? How do we believe this about the prodigal son and the older brother? What does it mean to believe it? Which means you only believe it in as much as you do something. What would we do out of this story?
I'm the one that would be complaining.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's fair.
Yeah.
And just like the people that go into the field and work, they've been there all day, and then some of those that come later, they get paid the same amount, and they're, wait a minute, this isn't right. And he says, they're his servants. He can pay them any way he wants to.
Right. Yeah. So one way in which if I'm genuinely believing this story, then I'm somehow seeing myself implicated in it. In other words, it's true. It's true doesn't have really anything to do whether it actually factually happened. It's true on a level so much greater than whether it happened or didn't happen. It's true on a level, like Edwina said, it's true on the level of this describes human life and experience as we understand it. She's like, yeah, like this hasn't happened before in the world. It's happening all the time. We go off in a huff. We think we can do better. We despise what we've been given, by our parents. It's true because it resonates, right? It's speaking truth about our humanity. And so I'm having faith in this when I'm saying, yes, this is true. And now I'm motivated. I feel a call in the story to somehow do something or be something.
I think we're always developing our worldview, and, left to ourselves, we're not ever gonna come up with these stories, I don't think. It's just nice to have something else, something else to do that, a different way to look at it, but it also tells you, there's still gonna be people who don't agree with your way in those views.
Right?
It's an attitude of gratitude.
Yes. Yeah. So I could very much feel, and because when I'm just reading it just now, I'm thinking, I am so easily that older brother. Grew up going to church, never smoked a cigarette, all the naughty things. I did right, Even my parents still looked at me askance, thinking I was a rebel. But I could so easily be that older brother saying, how dare that other person with all their filthy living just be so easily welcomed in? I could be that person, right? And so the gratitude thing is the Father is saying, somehow you've missed what it was like to be here at my home. See, the interesting thing that I see in this story is neither son thinks well of the father. Just because the older one stays there close at home and does everything, he still doesn't think well of the father. They both have a bad attitude towards the father. The older son thinks the father's stingy and domineering and commanding. The younger one thinks the same thing. He just left over it. It seems like the older one stayed and harbored all the same opinions, right? So the problem is neither of them know their father's graciousness, goodness, or anything like that, right? Because a younger son comes home not expecting grace or kindness or forgiveness. And the older son certainly doesn't have any grace, or he somehow hasn't become like his father, right? So if I trust the story, then I hear this speaking to me. I realize, I got to be called to a different way of living, right? That's where I'm starting to say, now, do I really believe this? Or do I just say, I don't believe it, you know?
Where I was gonna go, and I'll use the third person, because I don't want it to be like a personal story. But you can be very bitter about illnesses, or poverty, or whatever. And until you're in a place where, and I think this is an individual journey, until you get to the place in your individual journey where, I certainly questioned everything about why I'm ill. But when I see a 30-year-old who has no hair, who's throwing up and sitting in a wheelchair, then I have an attitude of gratitude at 65 to say, wow, I don't have the next 35 years. I didn't have 35 years of dealing with that disease, and whatever it is.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not perfected at all. And I don't think any of us have. But
Right.
it's gratitude. It's understanding where you are and not being bitter at the servants that got paid more than you, but you had agreed to that price.
Right.
Greg, one of the things that, to your point, that, it's true, right? It's whether it's factual truth, it's true. I think it's easier to accept that when you can start putting yourselves in lots of different positions in the story and finding truth, right? Because I can be truth that I want to be the father, right? Even when I've been done wrong, am I willing to open and embrace and run after the one who's done me wrong?
Right.
I can be the prodigal son, no matter how far I've gone and what I've done and how many times I've all I've got to do is turn back, and I've got someone, a father, wanting to meet me. I'm the servant who's explained to the brother, not just, hey, brother, back. He's back safe and sound. He's buying into this part. There's kind of, the truth starts becoming more evident when you can see all the layers
Right.
that's there, and then it becomes much richer than a factual story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're doing what I'm getting at is, yeah, you start really pondering the story irrespective of its factual basis, or was it a fictional story made up. That's irrelevant. The richness is coming in all these layers. Did you notice how when the older son is complaining, he says to the father, your son, and the father says back to him, your brother. Ooh, whoa. It's like the son, when the older one's complaining about the younger one, it's your son. He doesn't even acknowledge his own relationship. But then the corrective is, but he is your brother. Bam. That should hit you, right? At that level, you're like, how many times have I not acknowledged the inherent relationship that exists between us, but because of X, Y, or Z, right? And I'm unwilling to acknowledge it. And I need the Father to tell me, no, this is your brother. This is your sister. Yeah. Yeah. See, that's where you start saying, this is true. This is deeply true. And it's calling me to a certain way of living, a certain way of treating others, right? Now I can, if I'm trying to live differently, I can say, I believe that story. Well, why do you believe that story? Because I'm trying to be the father. And I'm trying to be more grateful. And I'm trying not to hold other people's past sins against them. Their mistakes, and throw it back in their face. Do you believe the story? If somehow you're doing differently in life based on what this story is saying, then you believe it. If you're not, you don't believe it, right? It's just a story. It's like, so I grew up going, to Bible Bowl, right? And I know Bible Bowls are not the curse of humanity or anything, but at the same time, it was an exercise in how much you knew, right? And I could win those things. You believe that, right? I could win those things. And yet, there was no connection between necessarily getting the highest score of answering the most questions and actually living any of it out, right? It was all, and it's not bad to have that knowledge because that knowledge can then become real in a way. But at that level, it was me knowing a bunch of facts, studying to win a competition, right? And it wasn't life-changing. So you could say I knew a lot, but did I really believe a lot? Well, not necessarily. I just knew it all, right? It hadn't...
Smoke 'em, right?
Huh?
You can smoke them, right?
Yeah, I could smoke them. We smoked this one team 120-0. I remember that one. So my brother and I were doing it together, and there were three of us, and we were so quick to the punchline that they never got a chance to answer. And then you're like, we know what we're doing. And it's like, well, we're just proud of what we just did. Whoa, do you know what you've just been talking? The arrogance, everything that's in a contradiction of everything we were saying, right?
And the other team goes, they're PKs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no fair. It's just, yeah. But see, we can do that, and church can do that. Church can often be about getting together, reciting things that we all agree are factual, and then it has no difference at all about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, interactions, choices made. It's just, but we agree on these facts. So that's why I'm thinking if we think about this idea, just hold that, maybe that thought. I only believe as much as I do, right? And if you hold that measure up, then we don't ever want to say, well, yeah, I believe that. Okay, back up. Wait a minute, slow down. Do you really believe that? What are you doing as a result of that? Or are you just testifying to a truth that hasn't transformed you in any way, right? All right, well, we'll stop here.